Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It is True Crime Tuesday yet again, and today we will be talking about a case that looks like it's finally gonna get solved after almost 50 years. Today we will be talking about the Lady of the Dunes. July 26, 1974 was supposed to be a happy day spent with family for 12-year-old girl Leslie Metcalf. The family spent the day at the beach in Provincetown, Massachusetts, until they decided to come home sometime during the late afternoon. Now, as they were about to leave, a local stray dog followed them, then suddenly ran off, frantically barking. Leslie then decided to run off as well and follow this random dog, and this is where she made a very disturbing and gruesome discovery. The naked body of a woman was laying in the dunes face down, and it already had started to decompose. The family, who was right behind Leslie, decided to call the authorities immediately, and once they arrived, this is when they discovered how truly gruesome this was. Now, based on the decomposition of the body, police estimated for her to have been laying there for at least 10 days to 3 weeks. Her skull was crushed on the left side, her head almost completely decapitated, and her hands missing from the rest of her body and were nowhere to be found. This was clearly a homicide. Now, beside her naked body was a beach towel that she was partially laying on, as well as a folded pair of blue jeans and a blue bandana. No sign of struggle was seen, and it seems like this unidentified woman must have known and trusted her attacker. Size 10 footprints, possibly belonging to the perpetrator, were also found around her body, and a military entrenching tool was believed to have been used to sever her head, or at least try. But before police could even begin to investigate what happened and figure out who had done this, they first had to identify this body, and that was not an easy task to do. The Lady of the Dunes was 5 foot 6 inches tall. She was presumed to be around 20 to 40 years old and was around 145 pounds before her death. Now, her hands seemed to have been cut off from the rest of her body to possibly avoid identification via fingerprints. This Jane Doe, however, did have a lot of extensive dental work done, and she could be identified via dental records, or so police thought. Photos of her New York-style dental work were released and distributed to every dentist in Massachusetts, and was even published in 2 dental care journals. However, no one ever came forward to identify this as their work. This Jane Doe was then laid to rest in the local cemetery under the name Unidentified Female Body Found, Race Point Dunes. Now, numerous measures of investigative efforts were carried out in an attempt to uncover who this woman was. Authorities checked every unsolved missing persons and abduction cases in the area, as well as vehicle registrations of who had the authority to bring their cars near the dunes. Now, 6 years later in 1980, the Lady of the Dunes' body was exhumed for the first time, and a composite sketch of her facial recreation was made. This was then spread all throughout the country in hopes of someone recognizing the woman. However, no one did. Now, in 2000, her body was exhumed for the second time. Bone fragments were taken for DNA testing. However, this too did not come up with a positive outcome. 13 more years later, the Lady of the Dunes' body was exhumed for a third time, for more DNA to be obtained. Then, the case became quiet, and this Jane Doe soon became the oldest unidentified homicide victim of Massachusetts. Now, despite this, police kept on working on this case unbeknownst to the general public. They never gave up on the Lady of the Dunes. They wanted to know who she was, who did this to her, and what led up to this gruesome murder. Now, over the decades, there have been a lot of theories and conspiracies surrounding this case. So let's talk about the most popular ones and probably the ones that could make the most sense. Now, let's talk about the most popular ones briefly. Now, the first theory was that this Jane Doe was an extra in the 1975 Steven Spielberg film Jaws. This theory was made public by a Tumblr user named Joe Hill, who also happened to be author Stephen King's son. Now, during the 40th anniversary screening of one of his favorite films, Joe Hill spotted someone eerily familiar in one of the scenes. An extra in the film looked extremely similar to the composite sketch of the Lady of the Dunes. Aside from this, the extra was also wearing blue jeans and a blue bandana. Now, this theory gained traction not only because of the similarities on the looks and the articles of clothing found near the victim's body, but because coincidentally, Jaws was filmed in the same location during the summer of 1974. And they wrapped up filming just a few days or weeks prior to this Jane Doe's discovery. Now, the authorities did make an attempt to reach out to the staff who worked for the Jaws film, only to find out that they did not have records of who they casted as extras and that the casting director who was in charge of this had already passed away. Now, the second theory was that the Lady of the Dunes was one of many victims of Whitey Bulger, a Boston mob leader who was serving 2 consecutive life sentences for 11 murders before being beaten to death in prison by a fellow inmate. Now, in 2015, a close family friend of Whitey Bulger came forward, claiming that the Lady of the Dunes was a possible victim of Bulger, as he had a very similar style of disposal and method of avoiding identification. However, nothing was really proven or nothing also came out of this. The third theory was brought on by a self-confessed killer named Haddon Clark. Now, during the time of his confession, he was already serving time for multiple murders, and he confessed to luring a woman into the dunes and hitting her on the head with a casting rod before sewing her hands off and using her fingers as fish bait. Now, he also claimed to have buried her hands somewhere else, but wouldn't disclose where. However, he didn't really have any further information to back this up, aside from the details that he already provided, which were all published in the newspapers, meaning everything that he said or everything he told the authorities was basically public knowledge. Now, the fourth theory was that the Lady of the Dunes was a criminal herself. A few days prior to her body being discovered, a woman named Rory Jean Kessinger, who was serving time for multiple bank robberies, had escaped prison, never to be found again. Now, sometime in the 1990s, the Lady of the Dunes' DNA was compared to Kessinger's mother's DNA. But alas, this was not a match. Rory Jean Kessinger was never seen again, and no one knows where she is, if she had died, or if she is still out there. But going back to our Jane Doe, the Lady of the Dunes. After all these years, police have continually made efforts in an attempt to solve this mystery that has been looming over their community for almost 5 decades, until a breakthrough was finally made. Now, in early 2022, the DNA obtained from her remains were submitted to Othram, a corporation that specializes on forensic genealogy, to help get answers to unsolved murders and disappearances. And with the help of investigative genealogy, The identity of the Lady of the Dunes was finally revealed after 48 long years. She was Ruth Marie Terry, a woman born in Tennessee in 1936. She was 37 years old during the time of her untimely death. Now, upon identification, her family was contacted by the authorities right away, and they are now investigating what led up to this tragic incident and who had done this to her. The authorities are now looking into Ruth Marie Terry's husband. It was revealed that Ruth had been married quite a few times, but just 6 months before her body was discovered, she tied the knot in a Nevada courthouse with a man named Guy Moldavin, who also for some reason went by the name Raoul Rockwell. Now, Guy Moldavin was said to have a sketchy past. He was the main focus of the investigation regarding his second wife and stepdaughter's brutal murder case. His second wife and stepdaughter went missing in 1960 in Seattle, and their dismembered remains were later found in the septic tank of their family home that they shared with Guy Moldavin. So yeah, pretty sketchy indeed. Now, aside from this, he also had some larceny charges for swindling his third wife's family out of $10,000 around the time that his second wife and stepdaughter went missing. Now, he was convicted for larceny in 1961 but was released the following year and was asked to pay his debt. Now, he was never charged with the murder of his wife and stepdaughter. But in 2007, he was featured in the book of popular true crime author Ann Rule's Smoke, Mirrors, and Murder, where his connection to various crimes was described. Now, in Ann Rule's book, she also mentioned that Guy Moldavin married a woman named Terry in 1974. Unbeknownst to the readers and Ann Rule herself, that this Terry turns out to be Ruth Marie Terry, the mysterious Lady of the Dunes. Aside from this, Guy Moldavin was also a suspect in the 1950 murder of a man and the disappearance of a teenage girl shortly after. He was never charged with any of these, and he later died in 2002 at the age of 78. And although it seems very likely that this was our guy, nothing has been confirmed yet, and the authorities are still investigating multiple angles and trying to figure out what really transpired leading up to this homicide. Now, as I have mentioned, even though the identity of the Lady of the Dunes was finally revealed, this is still an ongoing investigation as we still don't know who did this and why this happened. So for now, that is all that I have for you guys. As usual, I would love to hear your thoughts on this case, and should there be any other case that you would like for me to cover in this channel, please let me know by leaving a comment. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you guys on December 1st for Crime Mass.